You're listening to the Business of Pharmacy podcast with me, your host, Mike Kelzer. Tom, for those who haven't come across you online, introduce yourself and tell our listeners what we're talking about today.
I'm Tom Hartwig. I bring you a good deal of graduate training, but also, maybe more importantly, 30 years in longevity and gerontology, including working with pharmacists almost all those years. The average length of life is increasing dramatically, and there's a lot of implications for healthcare in general, behavioral healthcare, and pharmaceutical care. So that's sort of the conversation today. It's a topic I love to talk about.
When I was younger, my grandma Bohr, B-O-H-R, whenever I looked at grandma, she looked like a grandma. I think she lived till she was like 93, and she looked like a grandma probably from the time she was like 50. You know, she had these big clunky black shoes on and the nylon stockings around her ankles and a sundress on, and her hair was, white but not really curled or anything. And she looked old forever. And I look at my aunts, for an example, of people who are older, and I'm always like, when are they going to start looking like Grandma Bohr? And they don't, though. I mean, people look young to the grave almost. They never turn into this grandma look for me. And I can just tell that the generations are getting, closer together.
Well, Mike, there's so much of that. And I swear your grandmother, we may have a grandmother in common, because that's the prototype of my own grandmother, my Irish grandmother. There's a lot of things that are affecting that. One, there's, as you know, dramatic improvements in medical technology and healthcare overall, and the pace of innovation is increasing. Research says right now about every 18 months there are major breakthroughs in terms of everything from pharmaceuticals to genetic research and treatment. And the other thing that's happening is if we look at the generations past, most of their activity, and it's really fascinating, and that was global, tended to be outside, tended to be manual for both men and women. Different work, but it tended to be manual outside, depending on where you lived. Michigan winters, Florida summers, go to the Far East, and climates vary tremendously. The other thing we didn't have is the kind of dermatological care, the kind of sunscreens, the kind of vision services that basically allow us to age relatively well. And then overlay on that the fact that seniors, as let's just define it arbitrarily, because the terms have been evolving along with your grandmother's look and mine. The available number of resources for seniors, we by and large, the population 55 years of age plus has far more discretionary resources. Historically, the resources, their time and their money, went towards survival, went towards making it all work, whether it was the farm or an auto business or whatever a pharmacy, whatever they had. And now we have more time, more resources, some of us in relative terms, some of us not. I don't want to overgeneralize, but we basically have more opportunities, if we choose, to take care of ourselves, our skin, our hair, our pharmaceutical care, our lifestyles. And so we are looking different. The other thing that research tells us, and we know this, is, I got off of a bike trail this morning after about 20 miles, and I couldn't believe the amount of gray hair I saw on that trail. It's becoming a new day, but I always caution people we shouldn't take too much credit for that, because my grandmother and my grandfather, looking much like yours and others that may be listening, they needed to work manually. They needed to work out in that climate. They made a go of it during wars and depressions, and in their later life, sometimes physically, like you mentioned, the hair, your skin quality, even the dress in terms of what was available or affordable. Things have changed.
I think about like my grandma, as you're mentioning it here. I think about her. I know in their basement before she died, I know they had one of the old Ringer washing machines. And they didn't have air conditioning, and so their dress was almost more industrial. The shoes had to be clunky to get up and down the steps 10 times a day, and their hair, when you're sweating, the ladies are kind of pushing their hair back out of their eyes and so on. They're not worrying about having it curled, and you got the sundresses on and things like that just because of the heat. And so they just worked a lot.
Very strenuous work, women and men.
The part I don't like hearing, 55-year-old people like me are now old people. Now that can't be right.
No, and maybe, no, just the opposite. Programs for seniors 20 years ago started at 60, 62 plus. Then we saw them go down with the term senior, 55 plus. And now the terms, if we look in one generation, the terms senile, elderly, senior, they're all fading away. People don't want to be termed in those ways. And we know that's true ethnically and racially. I mean, there are the terminology we're using in our entire society is changing.
As you said that, I was thinking, and I said, okay, I understand senile and that, but then when you got to senior and elderly, I'm thinking, now what else do we call them at this point if it's not elderly and seniors?
Maybe we don't need a term.
Oh, there you go. Just as we don't, when we see someone who's 30 or 40, we don't say, oh, there's one of those
midlifers,
mother age people, whatever. Maybe you don't need a term. That's really interesting.
I think both marketing, but also research supports that. I remember at one point saying to someone, I think they may have been 3 or 4, how's it feel to be a little kid these days? And they said, what do you mean little? I'm 4. And it was the term they were reacting to. And so, what we do at Mature Living Environments is both with our Maturity Market Initiative and our Homes for Independent Living is we tend to avoid terminology. And if somebody needs to use it because generationally it's familiar, if there's a program that needs a title like geriatric long-term care, we get that. But I think we're evolving fairly rapidly now in the marketplace. And I think within a few short years, and by that I mean 5 or less, I think we'll see terminology not classify people by what we used to call a cohort. A cohort is a group that has something in common moving through time. And as we know with people that walk into any door, including pharmacies, is a 65-year-old isn't a 65-year-old isn't a 65-year-old. I mean, I work in Florida off and on, and there's a fellow, I don't swim that well, but he's probably 82 and he can outswim me in a heartbeat, and he probably looks better than I do. People
maybe now are grouped by interests and maybe physical capabilities and maybe, things like that, but not necessarily focused on the age itself?
Yes, unless there's a external reason for doing that. An example, we could call, I love to bike, and many others do too, and it's gotten to be, as we know, for people that have arthritis or some challenges, and some of them may be age-related, it's a sort of almost a non-weight-bearing exercise that's really good for us. Well, occasionally you'll hear, as you know, there'll be a senior bike ride because the sponsors needed some cutoff at, age 60 for competition purposes or something, or the Senior Olympics. So, but those are more and more arbitrary, and they tend to be more and more for a cause that's third party, not specific to the age.
Marketers are probably ones that do want to group us because then they can show these rate cards, to the different companies that are going after certain demographics.
Yeah. A quick example to support what we're talking about. I know a colleague who was hospitalized with COVID for 5 days, temp 104 and all the classic symptoms. In a major hospital, which will go unnamed, admitted for those 4 or 5 days. One night, it happened to be a nurse came in, and he had heard, some upheaval on the unit. And she said, well, this is the geriatric unit, and there's 3 people tonight that are here with Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and they're terribly confused and they're agitated. This guy was like 61, maybe 62. And the term geriatric, you thought, how did I get here? Now, in reality, we know beds were probably limited and maybe his placement non-COVID days would be different. But all to say, I think the terms in the marketplace, as well as some of the stigma that historically went along with those terms, I really think they're going away. And I think a younger generation is helping drive that.
I've heard that the generations, because of social, are a lot closer. So like in the old days when you had a 20-year-old and a 60-year-old, that was 40 years apart. And now, because of social media, that 40 feels more like 15 years. It's like all the generations are smushed because of social. And for example, people pick up slang easier and things like that because everybody's kind of like in this bigger conversation, more squished than you did years past.
It's really interesting that you bring that up, Mike, because we do a lot of care planning for people as part of our service. And there's a real mix of opinion about social media right now. And neither voice we're hearing in the marketplace is correct or incorrect. I should preface it that way. It's a real dynamic now that is working on getting resolved and is probably going to take a couple of years, if not a little longer. But here's what it is, and it's very interesting. Some people feel social media allows, given all the changes and the impact of COVID, for families to be either generationally or closer in terms of membership and communications. I have heard from other people that says I would take 6 tweets, set them aside for one 1-hour visit with my son, helping me do this or that, or my daughter do this or that. And one of the things that we've heard around communication, especially with older people, and this has implications for pharmacists clearly, is since by research, human communication is 70 to 80% behavioral or visual. When we talk social media, that goes away. We don't see the gestures. We don't see eyes. We may hear sadness. We may interpret sadness, but sometimes that's our read because we don't see anyone. Now Zoom has helped with that, where you get a visual. Certainly Zoom has helped, and technology has helped a lot of people, families, and especially people with advanced age that may be isolated, have some contact. In many ways they wouldn't. So it's not a categorical negative to social media. It's probably more just a limitation.
As I watch movies, sometimes I'll see online they call them movie cliches, and certain movies, they always have the bad guy, the bullets run out, that's a cliche in a movie. And there's a ton of other ones. It's like, yeah, you see those in all the old Westerns, or you see them in all the chase movies and different things like this. What are some cliches that you'll see maybe in the movies for the older generation that Hollywood doesn't want to let go of, but you say that's outdated or it's almost derogatory? Do any of those come to mind of things like that marketers in Hollywood that they want to grab onto that are just not that way in reality anymore?
Some of the stereotypes of aging in Hollywood in general and in the media in general that really need to go away are one, that a diminished capacity of people as they age is like a straight line down. There's a lot of research that says no, it's more like the waves on Lake Michigan, and that it's not a straight line down at all. The cliche would be, well, don't go talk with grandma, she's having a bad day. The other is references to memory. Well, they wouldn't remember anyway. Both with short and long-term memory, minus the impact of cognitive process or diseases like dementia, can sustain themselves because today people in advanced ages, and let's just say over the age of 55, as we were talking about earlier, are more active, they're healthier, they're better educated on the whole, whether it's formal or informal. So it could be a school education, it could be a military education, it could be 30 years on the farm, making sure everything works and grows. They also tend to, they're more informed, so they seek information, and they're more mobile geographically and personally, physically in terms of ambulation and mobility. Our overall emphasis with, especially with our Homes for Independent Living program, is we all want to be at home for as long as humanly possible, and we're right on the edge of being able to do that short of intensive medical care near the end of life.
I've heard before that prostate cancer, it's like everybody's going to get prostate cancer. It's just that people don't live long enough to see it always. Like everybody who's 100 would probably have prostate cancer. Talking about memory, do the advanced aged people, is it a given that memory starts declining as you age? I mean, I saw it in my mom and my grandma, and I think part of that was just their genetics. Is that a given that memory goes bad the longer you live?
Well, a little caveat, Mike, because that's a fascinating question. What we know about people over the age of 70, 75, somebody will say, well, boy, I don't remember Millie or Max being that ornery because I knew them in school. Well, what we know by research is if people had personality quirks if they have them when they're old, they had them when they're young.
The lines that you thought were parallel to the rest of the world were not parallel. They're at an angle, but as they get older, the angle gets bigger.
Oh, sure, right down to perpendicular.
Yeah.
Yet, in reality, we know with healthcare and medicine that with vascular loss and limitations, with the time, like with the yellowing of the eyes, with age, there's certainly, as we know, some realities that also apply to memory. It also is interesting as it relates to younger people, and my quirk about if they had a odd personality when they're old, they probably had one when they're young, is that if they may have had bad memory a good deal of their life, but it wouldn't be so apparent, and people wouldn't be so likely to dismiss it because now they're older. And one of the things I loved about my training at the Institute of Gerontology, and one of the things that one of the granddaughters of the founders of Steelcase in Grand Rapids used to teach about this, was Kate Pugh Walters used to talk about, let's talk about ability, not just disability or limitations. And she did a lovely job through time of talking about if you didn't exercise, for instance, your memory throughout time, you're going to be more likely to lose it the same way as if you didn't exercise your legs or your arms. You're going to have more limitations as time sets in, and with some arthritis and some vascular limitations possibly. So part of it also depends on how we exercise our memories. That's why, I had an experience the other day, and I thought it was interesting. It was from K Pharmacy down on Plainfield. I've been with them for about 30 years.
I've heard the owner of that's an asshole.
Well, I see his picture at the post office, but other than that, and Purdue University is still looking for him.
There you go.
He evidently has some kind of degree that they question. But
Yes.
this is all in fun. That's not true. But she took time in delivering a prescription to talk about where I was living and a little bit about my history, and I talked to her about hers. And it was a 5-minute conversation, so it was efficient from a business standpoint. But at the same time, we were talking about our memories a little. So one of the things that I really encourage young people to do, and this flies against some of the winds of social media, is when you see dad or mom, grandma or grandpa, aunt or uncle, friends across the street, to take time and say, what was life like when you were 6? I mean, those kind of exchanges are getting lost, and they exercise memory.
I've seen this online a little bit. They talk about, regrets of the elderly or the advanced aged. And whenever I think of some of my regrets, sometimes I have to say, yeah, but that might be a regret now, but in the midst of it, you did as well as you could. You were in a dilemma and you didn't have a million options. You had 2, and they were both kind of crappy options. As you're talking to the elderly, what are some of the regrets that you hear from them ever? And are they legitimate regrets, or are they regrets that the marketers seem to have shoved in their face, so they feel like it's a regret? What kind of things are you hearing from our advanced age family and so on regrets in life?
This is a whole nother broadcast or a series of broadcasts, because that is such a magnificent question, and it has so much impact on people's wellness that it gets overlooked. I'm writing a book on relevance as we age, and how people feel or don't feel relevant to the environment and those around them anymore. It's interesting. We hear a lot about regrets, and one of the things when we do, I encourage the team that works with me to take a little time, because someone may be depressed, they may be having a day in which they sort of feel melancholy or just gray. It may be a bad weather day. They may have had something they're not talking about. It could be, as you know, biomedical. It could be endogenous, as we call it, all sorts of options. But what I hear about regrets are things that are tangible. Two quick examples. A business decision, looking back, knowing what I know now, I would have made A or B. Or, during my divorce, if I wouldn't have had to work to support the family and get through the transition, my son or daughter may not have turned out A or B. And so a lot of the regrets tend to be tangible and the value of hindsight. And there's a marvelous TED Talk on compassion, and it talked about people who are known to be compassionate, doctors, pharmacists, ministers, rabbis, and many others. And many people, regardless of their profession, are compassionate. Compassion turned outward is a wonderful thing towards all of those around us. But then sometimes what I had to remind myself about, and then that's where this TED Talk hit, was self-compassion is very rare, where we say, damn, Mike or Tom, you did the best you could in that business decision, in that divorce, in that experience in the group, whatever it was, with a customer, a patient. But the judgment, the regret you have is the value of hindsight. You have much more information now. Your world is much wider now. So let it go. And a hard thing for all of us to do. And I think it's harder when you're older because you have more volume, you have more experiences you think about. And I want to overlay a bit, and I want to do this with caution, but religion, both formal and informal, in terms of what people believe or have faith in, can either help that out or make it very complicated in terms of how they approach guilt. And my own clinical experience over the years has been one of the biggest detriments, in my opinion, to people's behavioral and physical health is feeling guilty or responsible for things they never had control over to begin with, or at least didn't have as much control as they needed to make a difference. That's a fascinating question.
We all are. We're always harder on ourselves. Like, I think back when I was like 25, and I think, would I expect the same from my son or daughter? Would I expect them to know what to do in the similar situation? It's like, no, I'd be compassionate to them. I'd say, hey, this sucks. What are you feeling about it? But we don't do that to ourselves. All right, so we've gone down the social, psychological aspects of things. Go into some of the nuts and bolts of living as we age. I got some friends that are building a house. We're in our mid-50s. In a blink of an eye, we're going to be, 70 and need some of the things in the houses. So I'm thinking real easily, like not a lot of steps, a pretty big bathroom, that kind of stuff. What do people have to know that we should be doing physically in our homes?
One can do a lot with their home, however they define that, from public housing to an elite condominium. So let's use home in the generic. That's my second book I'm writing about how people define and the importance of home, regardless of the type of setting or the characteristics. Okay, to answer the question, one thing is if we think at a younger age, however one defines that we're going to be staying like I do in my current home in Michigan as I age, and my wife and my kids are all over the country now, our kids, then we approach it as that investment is valuable. So when we renovated the house, we made sure that those things you mentioned got done. And okay, times are tough economically for people, but at least get the plan. One of the things we do is we'll develop a plan for people. They don't have to do it all at one time. They don't have to bite the bullet and pay a contractor. The other thing we do is we make the plan adaptable to future changes. Example, in my family, there's dementia. In my family, there is mobility issues. So as we go in with people that are clinically trained and sit down and say, what's ahead? I just interviewed somebody. He's 45. He's got 4 kids. He was just diagnosed with MS. He just bought a condo, and he says, what can I do? And I said, well, let's develop a plan. So that's the other thing you can do is imagine adapting however you define home, adapting that to future changes you can't imagine now. You can narrow those down as to what's genetically more likely, which is what we do with family histories. But you can also sort of plan saying, well, if we're going to renovate, we're going to widen the doors now so walker wheelchair makes it through. When we put in our shower, it wasn't just go out and buy a walk-in tub. We put in very attractive, we try to make what we do very aesthetically appealing, and the customer decides what that is. But we put it out, and the tile that's there is over a styrofoam block. And so at the point we have to have a roll-in shower, we take that tile out, we cut out the styrofoam block, we put the tile back in, we got a roll-in shower. So there's some things like that you can do that aren't terribly expensive, but that are helpful. The other thing I really want to stress, though, is right now technology is a big boom. A technology-enabled home, whether that's $129 of a smart speaker connected to a computer system, or a smart thermostat, which our son has, that senses his movement. I think he paid $119 for it. It's paid for itself 5 times over in 3 years. We do also encourage people to infuse technology into their plans. So the big thing is the plan. The other thing is it's going to increase the value whether people, whether Tom Hartwig stays in this house the remainder of his life, short or long or not. It's going to increase the value of the house tremendously.
It's not like you're building the house for something that may never happen. Let's say blindness or something like that. Whether you're there or not, everybody is going to age.
That's right. And that's another thing before we leave the topic I should mention. When we talk about a home being accessible, we think about Mike or Tom owning the home or their family living there. The other part of accessibility, we do a lot of work with the Michigan Disability Network, young and old, is it should be accessible to people that would visit. My wife has a number of retired teachers that are old, let's say 75 to 85. They're starting to have mobility issues, and they like to visit. They like to get together for retirement gatherings and stuff. And the good part of that is when we designed our house, we designed it so it's not only accessible for us, it's accessible for family and visitors.
We have a cottage about 30 miles north of Grand Rapids, and it's relatively flat. There's no steps and things like that. And something I tell my wife, I'm like, I don't want to get rid of the steps too soon, because in our house, we're 3 levels and you're up and down the steps 10 times a day. I think that's really good for me. I mean, it's not the ultimate exercise, but when you're up and down the steps, it's pretty good exercise. And I think some of that can be let go too early, and that might be symbolic of other stuff that we let go too soon. And I think I've heard it said, they said anything that a person can do on their own, let them keep doing. And for this example, it's steps.
That's a great example, and steps, as you know, are excellent exercise. What we do is, at a minimum, maybe with your steps, we'd say consider putting in an attractive handrail now. Nothing that looks institutional. Our house happens to be oak, and so our handrails up and down are oak, and they look fine. But I'll tell you, even at my age, biking like I do and fairly mobile, I've caught myself a few times with boxes going downstairs where I would have fallen. So that's one thing. The other thing we do is when we talk about adapting homes to future changes, I also have a friend and a colleague who talked to me about getting a portable lift chair to go up and down his stairs. He's 60-something. And I said exactly what you're saying. Right now, that's great exercise, as long as you don't think you're going to fall. And if you do, there's, let's get the right kind of handrails in, because you can get the wrong kind of handrails. And I've seen people put them through drywall with plugs. I wouldn't ever want to rely on anything like that. But all we did at his house is we put backers in. So when he gets ready someday, if he stays in that house and wants that motor chair up and down that it's not going to be a great expense. We had to do some work on the walls anyway. So we just put the backers that such a system could eventually be installed with.
What's something that people hold on to too long in their home when they maybe should not have been in their home? Let's say someone that falls down 100 times a day and bloodies their nose every time they fall down. I'm thinking, okay, they maybe shouldn't have been there anymore. What's something that people maybe want to hold on to, but it's like, no, that should have been outside the home at a certain, let's say, disability?
Boy, just wonderful questions. And this one is tough for people because it, as you know, it just backs right up against that wall saying, I'm going to have to leave the place that I thought I could stay in forever. What we encourage people to do is exhaust every possibility to stay at home. And then there's a line, and that line is dotted because sometimes people's health improves. And quite often, and this is true of people in my profession, yours and others, docs, nurses, clinicians in general, small c, is that quite often when we do a judgment or a diagnosis, we're doing it at that person's low point. They just fell. So we need to, I can't tell you how many times, Mike, I've heard families say, we need your help, Tom, looking for assisted living because Dad fell. Okay, Dad fell. Is he okay? Did he break his hip? No, he pretty badly bruised, cut his head. Oh, okay. He had Band-Aids? Yep. Because if and there's a difference. I don't want to be naive, but if a 21-year-old fell, those are the kind of questions you ask. Okay, so bones are more brittle, balance is disturbed, sure. So what can we do about that fall prevention before we talk about anybody coming out? Same with a diagnosis of dementia. Well, we need to start looking for, quote, dementia units, unquote. First of all, I hate the term, but not dementia, but dementia units. So one of the things we need to change is our own evaluation of how serious the situation at the time that something adverse or concerning happens and people react. Because we know they tend to overreact. We do too. And some people underreact. But that's the point in which we can be very helpful. If somebody walks in the pharmacy or somebody calls us and say, well, let's sort of take a look at the whole picture.
Well, you're right. They're always going at the worst time. And that's not a bad thing to do. But most of the times things get a little bit better after that first fall or something. Of course, unless it's a huge diagnosis. But it's a good time to look, but not necessarily pull the trigger at that point.
Exactly. It's a good time to look. And I would add it's a good time to plan. This young colleague of mine diagnosed recently with multiple sclerosis. It's a critical time to plan, not a time in addition to the impacts of multiple sclerosis, as you know, to get thinking about, the quality of my life is over. There's some remarkable, as you know better than I do, interventions now for neurological disease. But one big thing about changing the house or changing that moment is just slow down that evaluation process with people. If it's an emergency, even if somebody breaks their hip, they will heal. The statistics about how many people over the age of probably 65 get admitted for some adverse event and then end up going to what we now call rehab in a residential setting, which is often a wing now of a long-term care setting or maybe an acute care hospital. And then from there, the statistic is alarming about how many people end up in long-term care as opposed to go home. We just need to intervene.
Once they go in there, then they get kind of stuck there because everybody gets used to them being there kind of thing?
Used to them, and the family might be exhausted if it's, been a emergency medical situation or a long-time development. There might not be many family.
If they maybe would have had a breather, maybe everybody kind of could have recovered both emotionally and physically and then give it another shot in the home.
Well, another interesting thing, Mike, about home care is the number of children in this generation is about half, roughly, of the number of children a generation ago, which was about half of the generation before that. Now, those are gross generalities, but generally true. Well, the number of caregivers just decreased each time by half, too. And let's assume that of the half that existed through those generations, normally, like in all families, one or two, there may be issues. There may be geographical distance, especially these days, legitimate geographical. There might be issues in which they're emotionally, psychologically alienated in the family. So the number of family caregivers has gone way down. It's not going to happen in this economic environment, but I'm a big supporter of subsidized family respite care. And by that, I don't mean paying to take care of our own relatives, because that then steps over a remarkable value in this country and elsewhere about family care. I mean, as a last resort, if there's nobody else, if the resources aren't there, and if it means somebody's going to have to leave their home as opposed to stipending a son or daughter to do the shopping and drive in from, let's say, Lansing to Grand Rapids, if there's $50 a week in family respite care, it's a much better plan for the society economically, but also in terms of our values.
What's something that could kind of get under your skin a little bit as you see something that you know could have been better?
It's people that will make judgments about either advanced age, saying, well, yeah, I would have asked him to go canoeing, but I didn't think they'd be capable. Ask them to go canoeing and sit in a rock if they're not capable of getting in the canoe and enjoy the outdoors and watch the fun along the river.
What message would you like to get across to pharmacists as far as how they can make someone's day easier, our aging population, how they can maybe just make their day a little bit easier by talking more clearly or by being more patient or this or that? And then secondly, I'm going to say a younger pharmacist because I'm tired and lazy, but if you had a younger pharmacist who owned a business, what's going to boom? Where should they be focusing and so on? So the two questions, how day-to-day can we interact better with people that are aging? And then secondly, where is that business opportunity?
Well, let's start with training. I was on the Ferris Foundation board for 6 years. And as you know, in addition to Purdue, I might add, it just a fine pharmacy school. And the dean of pharmacy became a friend back then, and he did a nice job about educating me about pharmacy and training of pharmacists. That said, I think it starts there, as you know. One is just, in addition to technical aspects of pharmacy, get some knowledge about many of the things you and I have talked about today, but the stages and overlaps of human development. Also, train pharmacists and then it's also available in what I call the field, once they're out and in the pharmacy, in the communication challenges and opportunities they have with older people. Direct eye contact, watch the behavioral stuff. If you're comfortable, hand-to-hand contact, because touch, being one of the senses, stimulates the channels by which communication occurs. So to train them about communicating, not only with people of advancing age, but also people that may have linguistic challenges of one type or another, or sensory challenges, vision and hearing.
What's an example of that touch? You know our pharmacy setup. What's an example of that?
Yeah. Well, I saw it at K Pharmacy. I saw it 6 months ago. Elderly woman, she was very distressed. She was coming in to get her prescription. The tech gave her the prescription and said, in addition to talking with the pharmacist, however that occurs, is there anything else we can do for you today, or is there anything else we should be talking about, and left it open-ended. That sometimes opens a door to, my husband's, this bruise, or my wife pinched me or whatever. So one is that, to reaching out. The other thing, it's funny that we're talking about. I went to my dermatologist the other day, and they had to take off a growth in my hand. It was an ugly procedure, and I thought, well, here, I'll put it up on this steel table. He took my hand and did the procedure while he was holding my hand. Now, okay, we'll argue about the sterility of that, but I'll tell you, that meant a lot. So there are things like that he didn't learn back in medical school. The other is to be really astute about end-of-life issues and ethics. And I think most pharmacists, from my experience, are. And they're often, as you well know better than I, not the primary agent at that point, but they're in the care linkages to the person. And pain control and palliative care has come so many light years. I think pharmacists in training should also spend some time on, let's call geriatric medicine, let's use the term specific diseases like dementia, sexual function or dysfunction, arthritis. I think that goes a long way. In terms of the business side, that's what our Maturity Marketplace initiative does. You often hear people say, well, I'll go to a big box store, I won't use names, and boy, I can get it for 15% less. Okay, fine. Well, I can get someone from K that if I'm injured on my bike and can't get out, will drive it up, put it at my door, ring the bell, and wait until I answer and talk with me, not just stick it in the mailbox. And so I think starting a business, how you lay out your pharmacy physically is important. So let's go back to how people define home. So it's welcoming and it's functional. Some of us inherit the structures we got, but there's a lot we can do with floor design these days. Not just in terms of mobility, but just in terms of it being welcoming. Same with shelf height. I mean, just either get a consultant, we do some of that, or just close the door some Saturday with your kids and say, let's walk through and determine, if I'm 85 in a walker, how could this place look different? And when I walk in, will I be encouraged or discouraged? Would it be a happy, challenging place or sort of a sad place? I think that could go a long way. And the other thing I think is in the delivery system. I think like Kay does, and I'm not just using that because you're on the end of this microphone. If I was talking with Costco's or Sam's Pharmacy, I'd be talking a bit about Kay, because I don't know if you've done this. You don't need to respond to that, but training people who deliver is critical. What to look for. I mean, it's fine to be retired. It's fine because clearly there's a role. I mean, talk about the value of aging. People gain a great deal by being retired and delivering and having interactions with people, whether it's food or pharmaceuticals, as you know. But training them what to look for with neglect, with abuse. If postal is stacked up and you think somebody's home because they wanted a home delivery, and what to do. And also how to communicate to people. Training people that are delivering. And then also training them in the value of your business. The lady I'm talking to you about, I think she was a retired. She must have used K Pharmacy and how much she liked working there 6 times in 10 minutes, maybe. And I was impressed. It wasn't marketing. I didn't feel like she was pushing a brand. She liked the pharmacy. She liked the environment, and that meant a lot to me.
That must have been when I was on vacation.
If we talk about pharmaceutical care, let's say my internal medicine, they primarily have you on record as my pharmacy, but you don't get any information about my care. I understand ethics, I understand HIPAA as you do, but is there any conversation going on about the pharmaceutical care being linked into with the access to patient information to a medical team? Like my cardiologist can access everything.
As far as actually getting the medical information, not really. I mean, we can determine by what medicines they're getting, sort of, but then the problem is vertical integration. Now you've got, CVS owning this and this and that, and they also own their own, mail order company. Well, then we don't know what medicine they're on from the mail order company. If we fill something, it will look for interactions against something, and then you'll find out, oh, you're also on this, but we don't see that just by looking at their profile. And then on top of that, you've got these pharmacies with vertical integration that are also selling the specialty drugs. And my definition of specialty drugs is a drug that makes a lot of money for the insurance company. And so that's only 2% of the number of prescriptions, but it's about 50% of the pharmacy overall revenue. The overall purchases of products in the US, 50% is specialized products. So there's so many products we don't even see. And so, yeah, seeing those, but on top of that, seeing their medical chart, we don't see that. But like I say, there's ways to dig in that, but that would sure be helpful.
Okay, gotcha.
Well, Tom, what a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for all you're doing for us old farts. I'm 55 now,
Yeah, you youngster, you. Age is somewhat relative until you're ill, and then it's not relative anymore.
Keep up the fight, because everybody in this world from 0 to 120 has a lot to offer, so I appreciate you standing up for that segment.
No, I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed our relationship.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Business of Pharmacy podcast with me, your host, Mike Kelzer. Please subscribe for all future episodes.